Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down Show, coming at you today with a fantastic episode. First off, my co-host is Jason Piccolo, and I wanted to take a special moment to just let Jason know, man, I think the heck out of this guy. He is constantly sending me new contacts at the rate at which I can barely keep up. So if he does do an introduction, there's a good chance that I just will not even get to it in the first week because he just is so prolific with all of his network, his friends. He's one of those guys that, look, I don't say this to a lot of people, but he's one of those guys that is so genuine. He's such a great American. I would love to see him run for Congress, and you actually will hear him talk about this in this episode. So it's interesting. Jason's got a couple different projects on podcasts, but if you get over to either Dr. Jason Piccolo on Twitter or the Protectors store, you will see what he is doing. And again, full endorsement. This is one of the good guys. It does not matter what party you are worried about or anything. Jason is just a good dude, and he's got a fantastic book. He was a former Army officer and spent time in the field, so he's legit in terms of his combat bona fides, but he's also a badged and credentialed border agent. So his experience on talking about the border, which is where he truly, I think, shines, it's just remarkable. I actually did an episode with him a few months back, and we really talked about the border problem from an actual practical ground sense thing. So I definitely encourage you guys to check out Jason's work. Full endorsement from O Pedro, and I think the world of him. A new friend in the world, another operator, Eli Crane, a Navy SEAL, who got out and said, I'm going to do something different. And what I love about Eli, what I love about Jason, a lot of us guys, is we're taking the Letterman jacket off. Like, yeah, I'm a veteran, and yeah, we did combat and all this other crazy stuff. But look, if you watch Shark Tank, you likely have seen Eli because Mark Cuban and Kevin O'Leary bought into the company. They invested in a company called Bottle Breacher. And if you don't know what Bottle Breacher is, Eli and his wife, Jen, take decommissioned 50 cal rounds and turn them into decorative bottle openers. So they cut a little back end of the shell out and just pop your bottle open and off you go. And they're beautiful items. They can be customized. And it's just, look, he is doing big things. And I think you guys will dig what it does. Eli is one of those guys that walks the walk. He actually puts veterans to work. He is a fantastic dude. I know you're going to love him. And, like a lot of these SEALs, he's going to shoot straight. So the business side of things, the Break It Down show is growing. The Break It Down show is growing like crazy. I'm super excited to bring a bunch of new things to you guys. There's something that we're not quite ready to announce, but there's another big crazy project that I think we're going to get to do, and I hope I can announce something here in the next few weeks. Prison Chronicles is coming along great. This is partly because you guys are out there supporting us, and I love it. So, write reviews, share the show, let people know about it. This is really like our lifeblood. When you see authors on the show, buy a book, post it. Say, hey, I bought the book because I heard about the Break It Down show. Anytime you can add the Break It Down show or my name into something on a post, man, I'm glad to participate with you, and I really thank you guys. Yvonne, I just can't tell you. Yvonne Oates shares so many of our episodes. She's such a champion. I love her. And Charlie and Tish and Dan and just so many great people. I'm super thankful for you guys. I'm going a little bit long here, so I won't bug you about Save the Brave today because I'll bug you in a few minutes about Save the Brave. But all in all, I'm very thankful for all of you guys, and I really appreciate you coming on this ride with me no matter where you are in the world. I'm thinking about you, and I'm your friend. Let's go on. Let's do this. Eli Crane, come on down.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick
This
Marotta.
is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
All right, this is Eli Crane, and you're listening to the Break It Down show.
We were just talking off mic, and I realized oftentimes the conversations that happen before and after the show are often some of the best things that we capture. Eli, of course, if you don't know already, and I don't know how that could be the case, but Eli is the CEO of Bottle Breacher. He does a bunch of other stuff. We'll get into all of that. He is a former Navy SEAL, and I want to get into that. But first, I want to talk about this. So we were talking about how Eli grew up around the Arizona area, And they do a lot of the jump schools in a place called Yuma because it's hot, it's dry, and reliable. You can jump almost every day out of the year. I assumed that he had, like a higher end jumping requirement because that's the case with a lot of operators, but it depends on the era that you're from. And so in his era, it wasn't required that you had Halo or Hey-Ho or... Hey, this is PJ Turner from the Break It Down Show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org, click on the Donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. Required that you had Halo or Hey-Ho or any of the other ones. So... but he did go to airborne school. So this is all that lead up directs me to this, Eli, is as a fellow combat guy, the last thing I want to do is jump in on a static line into an active combat zone. You've deployed as much as anybody else. You've carried all the gear. Is there any point in doing that stuff, or would you rather hey-ho in some operators, secure an airstrip, and then just fly those people in and land the plane?
I actually hate jumping out of airplanes entirely. So I'd rather ruck in 20 miles than jump out of a perfectly good plane. But, and the good thing is it's so rare that for guys like me that hate jumping out of planes, it's probably not going to happen. Right.
You can effectively avoid it. Is it that it's, everybody's got their thing. Is it scary? Is it just, you just rather walk or swim in?
Yeah, I think 100%, and I think it's, we all try and act like big, bad, tough guys, but I really don't like heights. And that made several things in my job as a SEAL difficult. Rappelling, spy rigging. I mean, it wasn't like a terrifying fear or anything like that. But if you gave me the choice, I'm going to keep my feet on the ground. And I think it's also good sometimes to be in a spot where you have to overcome fears, to do your job. And I think it just makes you stronger as an individual if you're able to do that.
And I don't want to stay on the military stuff too long because it's much more interesting what you're doing now. But I also want to say this. If you're going to go in by air, sea, or land, the most problematic one to practice, to execute, has got to be air, because it might be stormy and you might have to do something different, but you can oftentimes, and I am not a SEAL, so correct me when I get wrong, you can swim under the storm and then come out and, get there. But if the wind's blowing more than 25 miles an hour, you just can't static line jump. It's not going to happen. And by practicing that, everybody who practices airborne for any length of time is going to destroy some part of their pelvis down, right?
Right. And it's weird when you get to that school and they start talking about, I remember a statistic, and if I get this wrong, but I remember hearing a statistic when we showed up there that the chutes were actually designed to where you would fall at like 22 feet per second. And they were actually designed to get you to the ground as quickly as possible so that you weren't a sitting duck in the air. And I know so many guys that got hurt during static line, broke legs, hips, backs, etc. And it's a little amazing to me that it's, I don't know, that they haven't put more thought into it or, put more safety precautions into it, because, it's a matter of fact, the week before I went through airborne, a girl died there, at jumps. It's just something, it's something you got to take seriously and know what you're getting into.
So Eli Crane is at Eli Crane _CEO, and Bottle Breacher is at Bottle Breacher. If you haven't seen Eli's stuff, I don't know how this could be possible, but he's got these really awesome, among other things, bottle openers that are 50 cal shells, and you just pop it open and you'll check it out. We'll have a link to all that stuff so you guys can buy these things. I'm just going under the assumption that you guys all know who Eli is. If not, you're about to find out. So one of the things that I'm fully sick of, Eli, is look, it's part of who we are. You're a SEAL, I'm a spy. We've got a lot of combat time between the two of us. It's ridiculous, but I'm trying to graduate away from that. I want to take the Letterman jacket off and be like, yeah, I'm Pete, the professional podcast producer, storyteller. You're a CEO. You are not, yes, you're a former SEAL. Yes, I'm a former spy, but I'm desperate to get past that story now. I mean, pretty quick here, it's going to be 10 years since I've been in any kind of military situation at all. And at some point you have to let it go and be the next thing that you are.
I'm actually glad you said that. And I it's one of the things I talk about the most when I work with, active duty guys that are getting ready to get out, or guys that are going through transition. And that is, I think it's important that we're very careful with what becomes our identity. I don't think you should ever let anything become your identity that can be taken away from you. And that includes being a spy, being a Navy SEAL, et cetera, because I've watched guys that they've made their identity, so much of their identity and who they are is tied up in their career or their title, and then it gets taken from them, or their reputation gets destroyed and they've got nowhere to go. And for me, that's why my faith is so important to me. It's been the bedrock of my life for a long time, because that's something that nobody can ever take from me, regardless of how bad I screw up, or the stupid things that I do, or just how if life is not going well for a certain amount of time, nobody can take that from me. And so I highly recommend to all your viewers out there and your listeners that we be very careful with our identities. And we had a saying in the military that, what have you done for me lately? And it was basically focused on guys. They might have had a great last deployment or a great last platoon and done a lot of great work, but hey, nobody cares anymore. That's over. It's water under the bridge. And I think we need to take that same mentality into the private sector, and like, okay, you were a SEAL, or you were a Ranger, or you were SF, or you were a spy, or whatever the hell you were. That's great. But hey, what are you doing now? And are you pushing the envelope now? Are you going big now? And are you trying to be a better you today? I think we need to, I'm glad you brought it up, and I think we need to focus more on that.
What is harder to you, the getting over the hill through buds, through all the constant training, constant deployment, or being a CEO? Because, every business starts out small. You got your break partly on Shark Tank, but we have to all outwork our problems no matter what they are. What do you think? What's been the bigger challenge? Is it that every SEAL I know has said, I was willing to die to graduate through buds, and that's what got me through. I didn't care if my leg broke. I was going to keep going. But business doesn't necessarily support that level of commitment in that one direction. It requires a multi-pronged approach.
Right. I think, with respect to both, special operations, Navy SEALs, and also entrepreneurs and business people, both were extremely difficult in their own right. But if you had to say which one was more difficult, I'm going to go with being a Navy SEAL, hands down, every day. It's just you almost have to go through it to really get it. I mean, when you talk about SEAL training being 1 year long, and that's if you make it straight through with no failures, no injuries, and just 1 week. Just 1 week of that training, you're awake for 5.5 days, getting your ass kicked the entire time. You're cold, you're wet, you're miserable the entire time. And that, it's just like, most people have never even been awake for, 48 hours, let alone 5.5 days, with, the baddest dudes in the world they're with one job and one job only, to keep you alive, but to try and get you to quit. So it's like, it's really hard to start explaining to people what that is like, because they have nothing to compare it to at all. And it almost, until you get in the midst of it, it almost seems like, I don't know, almost like fictional, like that's not even real, that you can't do that to somebody. But it's no joke. And I feel blessed to have gone through it, because my baseline for what I thought was difficult changed dramatically after going through SEAL training. And I think that was one of the reasons I was able to be successful as an entrepreneur, because I pushed myself harder than I think a lot of people do. I held myself accountable. I took ownership of my failures, and I knew that I wasn't going to go very far, on my own. And so, I knew I needed to build a team of stronger, more talented people around me. And just those are just a few of the lessons that I took from SEAL training. But yeah, that's the one I would choose all day, every day.
Yeah, there's something that happens when you work at the level that we work at, and it's not thick skin, because thick skin ain't good enough, because sometimes those cuts are deeper than the skin. But when a pro comes up to you and says, you need to address this part of your game, you know that they're saying it not from a point of critique and hurt, but like saying, this is where you need to grow. That in and of itself is pretty rare. I often, like, for my civilian friends and folks that aren't, in that mindset, I have to say, I'm going to give you some advice, and I promise you can take it, because you have to somehow kind of soften up the blow. Because if I just said, that's not how pros do things, you have to do it this way, it's not a message that's commonly well received.
Yeah, I talk about it with people all the time, and I refer to it as putting on the love gloves. And it was difficult. I found it was difficult coming home to a family, especially my wife and daughters, after spending a day in that community, in that environment with those type of guys. I found it very difficult. Like, I had to turn the switch from a 15 down to a 2, and I that got me in a lot of trouble, just not knowing how to morph from one extreme to the other. And I find in society it might not be that crazy of a jump, but it's a pretty crazy jump, where you could say something there, or you could just tell somebody, hey, this is what the deal is. This is the no BS assessment of where we're at and what your performance was. And out here in the real world, in the civilian world, if you come that directly with people,
yikes,
they're going to need a safe space and a therapy dog. So, learning how to navigate that has been difficult, but it's been a good challenge as well.
Dude, you are a busy guy, working on getting this date locked down with you. And listen, this isn't critique. This is just, I'm illustrating. It's hard to get an hour of your time. And I know, like, I stay as busy as I possibly can too. Like you, I'm an entrepreneur, got my own business. But how do you manage what you're going to do? And I mean, you're on my show, and that's awesome, but you certainly don't have to do that. As you balance things out, how do you make decisions on your limited time resource and manage all that? It's just a lot.
Right. I think for me, a lot of it, and I started thinking about this more when I was, started getting later years of my life. I'm turning 40 this year, but around 30, it's not that old, but around 35 years old, I started thinking about legacy, and I started thinking about what legacy do I want to leave behind. And I highly recommend that to anybody listening to your show. Like you just said, this is advice that you can trust and you should take. We should all start thinking about legacy now, and that thinking about legacy and what I want to leave behind really helps me weed out the stuff that I don't want to do, and frees me up to do stuff like this. Because I don't know how many people listen to your podcast, but if a couple people hear something that I have to say, or that you and I are talking about, and it blesses them, or it helps them figure it out and get to the next level, then that's the type of legacy I want to leave behind. Because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've screwed up a lot. And so if people can learn from my mistakes and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way, then, that's important to me.
What would you say is the ratio? I totally agree with what you're saying. And I call it my bonsai tree of stupidity and my own mistakes, and I've cut off so many branches. The only thing left is the good stuff. What percentage of the time do you have to learn by making mistakes versus knowing the right thing to do? Would you have a sense for that at all?
Yeah, I think I'm getting better and better at it. But, it's like I was the kid that was fired from Baskin Robbins and Dairy Queen in the same year in high school. Like, I was on the fast track to Loserville, and it was, and I deserved it in both cases, and it was like, the first time I went through SEAL training, I failed SEAL training. The first time, I went to sniper school, I failed out of sniper school. The first time I sat down with an investor from my company, Bottle Breacher, I got laughed out of the room. So it's like, and those are that's the tip of the iceberg. But I would say a lot of times I learned by failing and then getting back up and taking accountability for the failure, figuring out what I did wrong, and then applying those lessons learned to the next attempt. And I think that's one of the biggest differences between the winners in life, the losers, and people that haven't become winners yet, is just how they look at failure. Winners look at failure and fear not as a stop sign, but as maybe a detour sign. Whereas a lot of people that haven't become successful yet, they run into failure or fear, and they see it as a stop sign or a turn back. You've gone too far. And so I think it can be one of the best tools at your disposal, but you've got to understand, that it doesn't mean that you can't get where you're going. It might just mean you got to go a different way.
A couple of my mentors that are older than me, they say a couple things consistently that it's my job to kind of figure out what they mean. For me, they're obvious, but they're not obvious. They're intricate and delicate, and then the execution is even harder. So, and basically, if I was to summarize what they say is, one, anytime you see fear, know that that's you limiting you, and two, it's the same thing, but it's not. Get out of your own way. Do you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on those things, or do they even resonate with you?
Yeah, I still have to, I heard Denzel Washington say in an interview one time, he was talking to the media and he said, you get good at anything you practice, right? You get good at anything you practice. And I've gotten good at, just swinging for the fence, good at just putting myself out there. And that does mean that I fail, I think, a lot more than most people, because I think most people are playing it safe and, they feel like if they're not failing, then they're doing a great job. Me, on the other hand, I feel like if I'm not failing at stuff, then I'm living too comfortably, and I'm never going to achieve, the big things that I want to achieve anyway. And so I think I've gotten good at it because I practice putting myself out there.
Yeah, putting yourself out there and dealing with that. I like to call it miscomfort. It's not discomfort. It's just a comfort you don't know. And once you realize you can do it, you're like, this isn't that bad. So when you look at the things that are ahead of you development-wise, what do you see? Is it business-related, personal, family? What do you need to work on?
Well, I need to work on a lot of stuff. I think the number one thing that I need to work on is my relationship with Christ. I alluded how important my faith was to me, but I think for me, that's where it starts and it stops. And also that's really going to help me live the purpose-driven, legacy-filled life that I want to live. As far as business and professional and personal things, I don't know where I'm going to wind up, but I know that I'm going to keep swinging for the fences. And I know that I'm going to keep trying to positively impact people, and bless people, and look for opportunities to, give back to them. And sometimes, in the midst of that, you get phenomenal business and personal opportunities, but that honestly is not what fills my cup. And so I'm just going to keep, and it starts with my family, and, being there for my daughters and raising my little girls to understand what honor and integrity looks like, and what I want them to become someday, and, teaching them about some of the mistakes I've made and how not to make them themselves. And so, I'm going to continue to dabble in entrepreneurship and, start new businesses and, all of that stuff. But that's not the most important thing that I'm working on. And, like, for instance, I wrote a faith-based book last year, or this last year, and I'm still trying to publish it. It's like everything else in my life. It hasn't been easy. I'm almost glad it hasn't been easy, because nothing good that I've ever accomplished has been easy. And so, that's kind of those are kind of the things that I'm working on. And I know that I come on kind of hard sometimes, but I don't think you had me on this podcast to BS you, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll be honest and authentic with people. And I think sometimes, like, I think sometimes it comes off, hey man, you're not supposed to talk about faith or, anything like that. And it's like, well, I think we've gotten so soft as a society and a people that, like, everything's scripted nowadays, man. And I'm glad this podcast isn't scripted. I'm glad we can talk about real stuff on this podcast, and it's like, whether that offends people or not, that's up to them. But yeah, dude, I'm going to try and be real and authentic and make a positive impact where I can.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, and the thing is, again, guys like us have seen what real struggle, real pain is. And so for me to ask you, I know you can take the questions I'm going to ask you, and I don't know what they are, but this is what I did. I mean, I would go out and ask questions of people to find out what's really going on. And sometimes you got to talk about uncomfortable stuff to get there. And I can certainly ask you a question about faith, but for me, I understand it. You have faith, and you're always trying to invest in that. And when you find something that's valuable to you, and I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second, the more you can invest time and value into that thing, it's going to reward you. So if it's in letting it go to the universe, and that's what you do, and that's your form of quote unquote faith, then you're good. And if it's in a Christianity based faith or something else, like if it's Taoism and you really get into that, if you put good energy into those things that create value, you're going to get opportunities and value back. It may not all be cash, but it's also not going to not be cash. You're going to get opportunity out of the thing that you invest your time into. And by the way, it ain't supposed to all be easy. Like you said, I say all the time, like, charity ain't easy. It's not easy to get up on a Saturday morning and go sit outside and listen to someone talk about something and then shake a bunch of hands. It's easier to stay home and chill. But folks that need help in charity, they need that extra effort,
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your charitable side, because you were saying you have several things you're working on. Let the folks know, because everybody's always trying to figure out how to get involved. And again, I say this, like, if you're an adult person with an established life, you need to have, a charitable charter that you work on to constantly give back with your time, your money, your presence, your attention. These are ways that we all can help build a community and help. So talk about what you're doing, because I know you're doing a lot.
Right. So tomorrow I'm jumping on a plane to New York City. I'm going to be going to an event called Elite Meet, where we teach special operators that are transitioning from the military different fields that they can go into, from tech to finance to entrepreneurship. And I always teach a class on entrepreneurship, and it's not just that, it's also trying to, help these guys acclimate and, pointing out some threats and some enemies that they might face as they, jump into the civilian world. So that's always a great opportunity for me. And then some of the charities that we're working with are America's Mighty Warriors in Scottsdale, Arizona. Mama Lee, she's kind of an iconic lady in the SEAL teams. Her son Mark was the first SEAL killed in Iraq. She's been running that for, I don't even know, man, probably 10 years. And she's just a phenomenal lady. And she's doing a lot of great stuff in TBI right now, with operators that have traumatic brain injuries and have their brains all, scrambled and discombobulated, and helping their brains get healthy, and just a bunch of stuff like that. And, and then I could go down the list on several others, from the Navy SEAL Foundation to the Chris Kyle Memorial benefit that we work with and continue to work with. But, for us, that was one of the saving graces for me, is that when I realized that this business that we had an opportunity to run, when I realized that we could use it in the mission sense, in that we could continue to stay in the fight and continue to help our brothers and sisters and the families of those that serve our country. So, in a way, I felt like my service just took on a different form,
Yep.
and that was very therapeutic and very helpful in my transition.
So it looks like Jason Piccolo has popped in. I invited him a while back, and he was limited on time. So, Jason, thanks for joining in. And we've been talking with Eli about just, getting past being a veteran and transition and being the next thing that you are, the challenges of running a company as a CEO, and, what was harder, that or being a SEAL, just these kinds of things. So I'll give you the next question, Jason. Hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. You know, just these kinds of things. So I'll give you the next question, Jason. Whatever you want to ask Eli, let's dive in.
Yeah, I like that you're talking about the veteran hiring and the vet initiatives after they get out of the service, because, you know, that 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 years, 10, or whatever it is that you spent in the service is kind of like your toolkit for your next step. So one thing I've been following Eli for a while, and Eli and I became friends, is seeing that he does hire veterans and he does go out there and talk to the veteran community. Now, Eli, what is your recommendation for getting to that next step into, you know, a small business and stuff like that?
Well, I think the first thing, small business isn't for everybody, but I think, you know, as these vets are transitioning and getting out of the service, I think mindset, like in everything else, is key. And I think the number one things that these guys need to look for is they need to understand that most of us are wired for mission, right? That we're wired to do something that's bigger than ourselves. And so a lot of us, we don't understand that. So we isolate ourselves, and then we make our life all about making a paycheck, insurance, providing for our families. And we don't realize that we get into trouble because we feel as if we've got a big hole in us. We've lost something. And oftentimes that something that we've lost is mission, right? So these guys need to get involved in something that's bigger and greater than themselves. And it definitely helps if there's a brotherhood involved in that. So, and I don't care what that looks like. It could be anything, you know, it could be totally different for you than it is for me. But I think that's one thing they need to look at. Then I think expectation management is very crucial in that you need to understand it. I talk about diversification when you're getting out. I know I started a business. I was going to school. And I was doing a couple other odd jobs. And I think that stuff like that is important, because if you think that you're going to be perfectly happy in your first assignment or your first job, there's a good chance that you're going to be wrong and you're not going to be, you know, happy there. I think most veterans change positions like, you know, 2 to 3 times in their first year after getting out. So there's nothing wrong with diversifying, getting a couple things going and figuring out what you actually like and what you're passionate about. And then if you do want to become an entrepreneur, I highly suggest that you understand that just like in combat, you're not going to build anything by yourself. You better build a team first. And you got to prove your concept early. That means that you get people to pay for your service or your product with hard cash really quickly, because a lot of us will sit there and we'll dink around and we'll spend thousands of dollars and years of our time on a product or service that nobody wants. And watch some Shark Tank if you want to be an entrepreneur. That'll really help you right there. But hey, Jason, it's good to see you, and I'm just glad that you're not, 3 sheets to the wind by now. I know that you like to booze it up at night on the East Coast, dude. So I'm surprised. Where's the Kraken bottle, bro?
I know, man. I'm looking for it right now. I just got done doing an interview about the border, so my head's
just busting your balls, man.
I know, man. I'm thinking about, hey, but you know what? You brought up a good point. And, I did that with my small business, and I threw a lot of money into advertising, and I learned that, you know what, rather than focus on, my passion really wasn't into it as much as podcasting. So I focus more resources on this than I would that. So it's a kind of jumping, and I'm later on in my career. So it's like, it's not like I'm just, starting out, and man, have to network. And that's the same thing with, like, yep. Pete, you and everybody else, you got to network, and you got to find people you could actually rely on. A lot of people have good intentions, but then you slowly find out that their intentions might solely be on what their intentions are.
Right. And, I think that's one of the reasons we became friends. It's just because I recognized that you're a pretty solid dude. And to me, it didn't matter what your background was. It didn't matter that we, whether we served in the same branch or not. But, long live the veteran brotherhood, man. It's like, I think that as vets, we don't do a good job when it comes to trying to lift each other up, encourage one another, and help each other out. And I think what comes around goes around. And if, you know, if you use your abilities and your assets and your Rolodex and just everything that you know to try and bless other people, especially other veterans, I think you're gonna have a much better transition and a much better second chapter than if you just try and keep it all to yourself and you're selfish and you just make it all about you.
Well, there's enough to go around, and that's the thing. Is a lot of what we're realizing now is you can be a ranger up, you can be a grunt style, you can be a bottle breacher, and there is enough product, enough business out there for you to exceed and excel.
Yeah, there is, man. And I think, I try not to pitch entrepreneurship too hard to the veteran community because I know how difficult it is, but I do think that veterans are more apt and more likely to be successful in entrepreneurship, just because when you look at what it takes to make a successful entrepreneurship, from resiliency to being a team player, to being able to think outside the box, to being able to do more with less. I mean, we're coming into this with a lot of the necessary skill sets that you need to be successful. And so, like you said, there's a lot to go around out there. I just hung out with Badass Beard Care from California yesterday in Tucson, and those guys are doing some amazing things in their headline business, but also in new entrepreneurial things that they're coming out with. And it was just cool to share ideas with them. Look at risk mitigation with them, point out things that might be coming down the pipe that might take them out, and vice versa. And it's just cool to be able to be a brother long after we take off the uniform.
Yeah, it's cool. This brothership, this fellowship, this family that we all have. And not that service really matters, but it really doesn't matter once you're out. Like the branch, I should say. Like, when we're in, maybe there's a little more, fun having, but once we're out, like, I just don't even care. If you're from the Navy, it doesn't slow me down at all. I want to help or, be helpful in some way to you. I do love that about who we all are and what we're doing. Let's look to the future a little bit. What's coming up for you guys? What can you talk about that's on the horizon?
So we're starting a new business out of our facility. It's called Sabino Gifts, and it's just basically an opportunity for us to do a better job utilizing the assets that we already have. Stay tuned for that, because I think that'll probably launch here in the next couple weeks. I'm obviously working with Sig Sauer quite a bit, and I'm just having a blast doing that. Promoting their products, shooting their firearms. We're looking to going to SHOT Show with them and having a booth at the range day. And, I just couldn't say more positive things about that company and how they're pushing the pace and innovation. I also talked about, writing, and I do a lot of conservative thought leadership videos right now with Dan Bongino. And so if you want to check some of those out, go to Dan Bongino's Facebook and look up My Ugly Mug, Eli Crane, and check out what I have to say about stuff.
When it comes to all of that political stuff, I've been exploring this for about 6 months now. Okay, Sebastian Younger gave us a tasking, and he's like, now that you guys are back, we don't need you to go abroad. I need you to work on gathering us all in the middle. So as a conservative guy, how do we gather up folks who are in the middle? And more importantly, how do we gather up some of those folks who are on the left who probably want 90% of the same things? It's one thing to stand on one end of the spectrum and shout at people, but it's a whole different thing to say, how do we get together and solve some of these problems that are in front of us? And then maybe even agree on which problem is that we want to get after. It seems like we careen around from offense to offense and never get to what actual problems we can deal with.
Yeah, it's a tough one, especially in a polarized environment, and I think, I think it's tough. I think a lot of that, comes down to your delivery, but, and I think there's been way too much compromise in a sense. And I think if you look at the trajectory of this country, we're there. You could argue that we're in trouble. I mean, some of the foundational stuff and framework stuff about this country is really under attack. And so for me, it's, I'm going to try and love people, but but at the same time, I'm going to try and stand for what I believe in. And I'm not going to sit there and just placate you and, tell you, oh, I'm right, you're right, we're all right, just because I don't want to offend you. If you get offended by what I say, then that's okay. You know what? And this used to be a place where we could say, you know what, brother, I, we, we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one. And let's both be thankful that we live in a country where, we can actually disagree on something. That's one of the things that bothers me the most about where things have gone, is that if you disagree with somebody's politics, you automatically assume the worst about them and you demonize them and you paint them into this picture that they're just a monster of an individual. And that really bothers me, because that I don't feel that used to, at least when I was growing up, that didn't used to be the case, and I feel like it's gotten more and more, to that point where if you don't agree with me, you assume the worst about me. And honestly, that's not going to stop me. And I don't think it should stop any true patriot from, saying what they feel needs to be said and saying what they think is right.
Well, you bring up a lot of good points, and I know because we're friends, you all have a really good faith background, and you use that every day in your life. Is that kind of one of your decisions, was to come forward and say, you know what, I'm actually not going to sit in the background anymore. I'm actually going to talk about what I feel, maybe not just to sway people's decisions or what they're thinking about, but hey, maybe bring a different perspective on what you think.
100%, Jason. And here's the thing, man. If I was willing to, I actually joined the Navy the week after 9/11. If I was willing to pick up a gun, go around the world and try and protect those that can't be protected themselves from terrorists, violent people, evil people around the world, then why would I stop and not be willing to open my mouth when I see something that's just as destructive, and just by utilizing my freedom of speech, right? And that's part of my problem. I can't tell you how many times I talk to people that say, you know what, Eli, I wish I could say the things that you say, but I'm a business owner, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my job, or I'm afraid that, and it bothers me. And I made a decision that if that was going to stop me from having a job or a position, then that position or job was not for me. And I was going to stand on what I wanted to stand on. I was going to be who I wanted to be, because at the beginning of this podcast, I talked about legacy. And one day, somebody's going to read my eulogy. Somebody's going to talk about who Jason Piccolo was, who Eli Crane was, long after we're gone, or they're not. And if you're so hell bent on just, blending in with the crowd and never making any waves, I got news for you. You're probably not going to, I don't think you're going to leave behind a very solid legacy, because if you can't speak what you think is the truth, especially if you're not doing it in a way that is, meant to harm or, hurt other people, without offending people, and that stops you from, freedom of speech and saying what is important to you, then I think, I think, I think in a way you're in trouble. And I think you've, I think you're in danger of, just going along with the crowd and letting popularity and not wanting to offend people dictate, what you're about and what you're going to stand on.
As a business owner, you deal with a lot of financial type decisions. Obviously, you have people who help you manage all that stuff because it's super important. When you hear candidates talking about, taking and taxing corporations and taxing the wealthy, as a person that looks at bottom lines all the time, is that a reasonable solution to money problems?
Not at all.
Oh.
Matter of fact, it's gonna backfire tremendously. I've seen firsthand what happens when you start really laying heavy tax on business owners. And business owners, whether people understand this or not, small business owners are the lifeblood of this country. I saw this happen after Shark Tank. We didn't really know what was going to happen after Shark Tank. We grew by about 600% right after Shark Tank. we went from about $1 million business to about a $5 million business the year after. And we got hit with the tax bill that was close to, I think, $700,000. It was probably more money than I'd ever made in my life. And it not only did it piss me off that the government took that much money from me, because now we were in the highest tax bracket, but it also drained the lifeblood of our business. Right. And so we went from thinking we were in a place to grow. We were going to reinvest. We were going to buy new machinery, new process, hire people, to thinking, oh man, we've got to lay people off. We got to fire people. We're not, we've got to really tighten the belt. And that's what people don't understand, is that you actually want business owners to feel wealthy, because when they feel wealthy, most of the time they reinvest back into their business and the economy, into their employees, into their businesses by buying new machinery, coming up with new process, investing in other business, et cetera, et cetera. And it you see the exact opposite when you start to look at more government control. Unfortunately, like I'm talking about, and this is one of the things I talk about, is a lot of people now are really pushing socialism, and that will be the economic death of this country if they're ever able to get it through.
Well, Matt, hang for a second, because it's one thing to hear it from someone blathering about on Facebook, but it's another thing for someone who manages the bottom line and says, I want to reinvest in my company. And if your company is going well, then you're like, what else can I invest in? Who can I give a shot to? I don't know a single ultra wealthy person that doesn't look constantly for things to invest in and people to mentor and ways to give someone else their shot. I don't want to create uncertainty. And I'm not claiming I have the answer, but I don't want to create uncertainty in that person's mind on, money and financial stability, because I've seen the opposite end of that scale when there's not enough and everything becomes a problem. You can't get anything done because there's not enough, and everybody's worried about not having enough of this, or why did that person get that? Like in Iraq all the time, how come they have electricity and we don't? Like, I was just in their house. They don't have electricity either. They might have it for an hour a day. All of these things create problems, but I just hope that we can figure out a way to see that, when we help business owners not have to pay a government bill, instead of, and then invest in their own company. I think it works better. Jason, do you have any questions?
No, I don't, man. You guys are hitting it all right on ahead. And you know what? I love doing these podcasts, man. I just have to say that, getting this community out there, getting the knowledge base from professionals like Eli and yourself to the veteran community, not just that, but to actually shine a light on veterans themselves to the civilians that are listening to it. So definitely, brother.
Yeah, a lot of my friends who listen, they love veterans. And what I hope is that, and the show is worldwide. We got listeners in over 80 countries that are actively listening every month. So there's a lot of people around the world that are listening to this because they like something about what we're doing here. And I like to think that as we bring on Eli, and then we also have on Rory Kennedy, who see the world in two totally different ways, we can have a reasonable conversation. And we don't got to necessarily agree, but we can all go, yeah, I understand your point of view. It doesn't work for me, but
right. No, and that's great. And that's what I was talking about. I mean, I realize that oftentimes I'm at, maybe not the extreme of one issue, but I'm talking about things that can be very polarizing to people. But I do long for a day and a resurrection in this country where we can once again say, hey, I don't agree with you, but I'm glad that we live in a place. I'm glad where people have gone out and fought so that I have the right for free speech. And you see that, just last week, there was a guy pushing for, anything that, they considered hate speech to be banned. And so you start following that down the rabbit hole and like, all right, who gets to determine what is hate speech? I would rather you be able to tell me that you think I'm the biggest most worthless piece of POS in the world, but at least you have the freedom to say that. And I feel like we've lost that in this country, the understanding of how important that First Amendment really is. And glad that we can do it on your show. And I hope that that's something as Americans that we can do. We can agree to disagree with each other. And I hope that you continue to have a very diverse pool of people on your show, because that's where real education comes, when you're not in an echo chamber the entire time,
Yeah.
and your listeners are getting, different points of view.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. We do that. And I agree with you. That's what it takes. Like, you have to hear, you can't, your political adversary is not your political enemy. And enemies are for killing. Adversaries are someone you disagree with, but you could have the ability with an adversary to go, hey, you know what, on this one problem, let's work together. And we certainly need more of that from our Congress and from our leaders.
But on that note, I mean, have me on again, because I mean, you need the right viewpoint as well.
Well, for sure. Viewpoint. Hey, listen.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I mean, there's the other viewpoint, but there's also the correct viewpoint. So, I mean, your listeners should probably be getting a healthy dose of that.
Well, it's funny. And maybe there's something about how I present the show, but I ask people from both sides of things purposefully. And the left doesn't say yes as much as the right does. So,
Well, there's a couple theories on that, but I think the theory is that, unfortunately, the left has become more about emotion and less about fact. And when that becomes your platform, it's a lot harder to, have a sound, rational debate, because, it's like, I'll defend, my points with anybody against anybody. And I'm sure that there's going to be guys and gals out there that know more than me and, can debate me into a pulp, but I'm not going to back down from it, because I believe in what I'm talking about. And it comes from a place, in most cases, of experience and knowledge, and not just emotion and anger and frustration.
One of the conversations I had the other day, that a person was asking on Facebook if, people were worried that Donald Trump wouldn't step down if he loses the election, or, at the end of his 8 years, if he wins. And I thought, what a interesting question. And are we really worried about that? And if we're worried about that, how out of touch am I with the world to think about this? Were you guys for a second worried that President Obama wouldn't step down? Are you worried that President Trump won't get out of the way? Is that something that bothers you in any way?
No, it's not. And I'll tell you what, I'm a big Donald Trump supporter, but the moment he ever tried to pull something like that is the moment he loses my support, because, it's like, there has to be a standard, right? There has to be some sort of standard. And, it's like, most of the folks that I know didn't elect Donald Trump. They don't like him in the White House because they want him to be their preacher, their Bible study leader, right? They want him in the White House because they knew that we needed a fighter, and they knew that this guy would, he would take on all comers. And this, and that's one of the things that we love about him. But if anything like that were ever to come down, you would see even his most loyal supporters. I think most of us would just be like, all right, we're done with this guy. Get him the hell out of there. But I think that's just ridiculous, and I think it's hyperbole, and I think it's just nonsense.
No, I agree completely. I mean, as soon as he steps over the line, and if Obama stepped over the line, they're going to lose support, regardless of, the main base of both of them would be like, hey, you know what? There's laws, there's amendments. There's no way this is going to happen.
I asked this question the other day of Chad Prather, because Donald Trump definitely makes a lot of his own problems. We have to accept that. But he also makes people crazy, just crazy, like where they lose all ability to function in a normal adult way. And then there's the good things that he does. Does all of that churn that comes from him just being president, is it outweigh the good? Is he, and I'm not saying good or president or bad president, but just if someone takes a picture, the entire world is distracted by this guy, not in a positive way. So how do we, is there a balance there? Like, is the good outweigh the bad? Because there is a lot of problems with, look, the president shouldn't be picking on people and teasing them openly. Yes, I get it. They say terrible things about him all the time, but I feel like that there's a lot of negative that comes with that whole attitude.
I agree with you. And, honestly, there are times where I wish that Trump would definitely act more professionally and just knock it off with the theatrics sometimes. But for me, when I look at the direction that this country was headed, and when I look at some of the things, how far they've gone off the rails, I knew that we needed a fighter. And when I look at the rest of the RNC and the other candidates that they put up to run against Trump and for the president, I don't think one of them out there was a big enough fighter to go into the swamp, Washington, D.C., and start shaking things up. And for me, that's why it's worth it. I'm willing to accept the good with the bad. And, and like you said, there are certain times where it's like, really, man, you don't need to say that. That's not helpful at all. And it is beneath the office of the presidency. But, on the other hand, you needed a fighter in there, or you weren't going to get. You're not going to get stuff done in Washington, D.C. I don't think so, with somebody who's more concerned with their manners than they are with getting stuff done. And I think that's why it had to be a guy like Trump.
Why don't we get better people interested in doing that job? I mean, President Trump is one thing, right? He really, from a long time ago, wanted to do this, and he worked at it. So, okay, but we probably could think of 25 people right now between the three of us that we'd be like, oh man, it would be great. We think this person could handle it. Like Jeff Bezos could probably handle the job. Political lean aside, he knows how to run a massive organization. Secretary Mattis would have no problem running half of that organization just based upon his experience alone. And what he didn't know, he could bring in the right people. And we know he could manage it. But why don't?
But that's not what it's about.
Right.
That's not what it's about.
Nice.
Look at it. Just look at you're 100% right. A lot of guys out there could do, I think, a pretty good job running this country. But look at what you'd have to deal with. I mean, come on, man. 2 years we were told that President Trump colluded with the Russians, and that was a completely fabricated bullshit story. Everybody knew on its face that it was complete garbage, yet it was propagated as fact from the media, for 2 years. And even so many people high within the Department of Justice. So it's like, you want to know why we can't get good people to run for that? Because they don't want to deal with that crap. Who wants to put their family through that?
No.
Who wants to have who wants to have opposition parties and partisan politics run smear campaigns where it's like they just literally make something up, about how Jason Piccolo was in bed with the Russians. Eli Crane was in bed with the Russians. Who wants to deal with that shit? Nobody does. And that's one of the reasons why you don't get good people that are willing to do it, because good people are like, I don't want to do that. That sounds horrible.
Yeah.
And it's not just a presidency. It's every office now, because I occasionally I hint that maybe I'll run for office in a couple of years, but then I'm like, man, do I really want to go through a smear campaign, or do I want to just kind of stick in the background and do what I can?
No, I've thought about the same thing myself. And it's like, there's a lot of people that would say, because I think that we should have a wall on our southern border, that I'm a racist. Some guy on social media the other day said I was a white supremacist and I should be on a government watch list, right? I could just see the mainstream media, running with some of that crap and, painting me out, and then my kids having to watch that nonsense. And then, it's like a lot of people just don't want to deal with, just how divisive and the blood sport that it's become. And it's sad to me because they end up ruining a lot of good people, because for them, the ends justify the means. And that, I don't think that should be the case.
When people call someone like you a racist, they have no idea what they're talking about. Let me tell you what happened earlier this year. Johnny Walker, who's a brother. Johnny Walker is the only person I know that is allowed to wear a trident, who is not only not graduated from Buds, but is from another country that we went to war with. And when Johnny swore in as an American citizen, he had the second biggest crowd there. One person had the second biggest crowd. The biggest crowd were all the Mexican families that were celebrating the folks who were swearing in. And in that crowd were a bunch of your brothers, just a whole bunch of SEALs. And every single one of you guys, you all go out to liberate the oppressed, to go help in some way in other places. We don't care that Johnny is a Muslim. We don't care that Johnny is Iraqi. What we care about is that he's an American, a fucking great American, who put his life on the line for way less money, for way less credit, for way less future than any of us had or have. And he did that for us because he loved who we are. And so anybody who thinks that especially the operators, that there's some kind of racial bias there, they're fucking crazy, because that's not how it goes.
Honestly, it's not even for a lot of these guys that throw that word around and other labels, disgusting labels. It's not even about whether they think you're a racist or not. The reason they do it is to silence you, because they know that if they know how powerful it is, and they know that if they can pin enough of that shit on you, then you'll stop saying what you're saying. It's bully tactics, and it's been going on for a long time, and it's just absolutely disgusting, because you've seen it become like a dead horse that gets kicked so often that when there is real racism, it's been such a dog whistle that people don't even hear it anymore. They don't even look over there anymore at the real racism, because it's like the boy that cried wolf. I know your parents probably taught you that story when you were a kid. If you call everything that somebody does racist, and it's in the news cycle nonstop, there comes a point where people quit, they tune it out. And it's sad, because there still is racism going on. And not only are you not using it appropriately, they're using it to attack people, but then, it totally discredits, racism when it actually is taking place. And I think it's just disgusting, but it's another thing people don't want to deal with. And another reason why, good people don't run for office.
Well, I don't want to take too much more time, but I do want to say this. A bunch of Mormons in Mexico were slaughtered today, just below the border. And if I had to pick the president that I wanted to be in charge, it'd be President Trump. Not that I want to send your brothers or Delta in to anywhere dangerous, but this is why those guys exist. We're going to find those fuckers, and we're going to ghost those people, and we're going to make it hard for them to ever do that shit again. I don't think that maybe George Bush would have done that, but I just don't believe that we need a soft person in the office all the time trying to do it. Ronald Reagan put a missile in Gaddafi's pool and killed his kid, and Gaddafi checked up and said, "I'm never going to put a bomb on an airplane again." So when it comes to that, thank you for the things that you do, and Jason for the work that you do on the border, educating all of us, because there are bad people out there, and we do need to take care of business when business needs to be taken care of. And I appreciate you guys both coming on the show today and let me get up on my soapbox for a minute, but also just hanging out. I really appreciate you guys.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Appreciate you having me on. And Eli, it's great to see you on here, man.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't too much for you, man. I know that I bring the heat, And
you do, man. I like it. I gotta have you back on again.
I'm just glad you're sober, man. Thanks for showing up sober to the podcast.